Again. So with our second half for today. So Rafael, go ahead. Like Mathilde, you have 15 minutes total, so I would recommend 35 minutes presentation. Let you know when we have 5 minutes from the 35 cutoff.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm going to also setting up my timer. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you very much for inviting me, for flying me across the ocean to come here. This project is Disengagement with Politics, Evidence from Smartphone Content in the 2024 Elections. It's joint work with Guy Aridor, Levy, and Lena. And it's just as Mathilde is preliminary. This is actually the first time that any of us presents the paper, so any feedback that you have is very welcome. Okay, so this figure might be quite familiar to you. You know, you're on public transportation, and either you are already looking at your phone, and you know, you look up and you see that everybody else is looking at your phone, at their phones, or you know, in other contexts that are not public transportation, you'll always see quite a lot of people looking at their phones and spending a lot of time. And it's not a coincidence, right? Like 92% of adults, at least in the US, own a smartphone and spend over 4.5 hours per day on their phone. So it really has taken over our lives, and we devote a lot of time on these devices. This presents an opportunity for social sciences because and this is the big if we can get access to this kind of data, then you have everything. You have coverage of most of the population, and you have a coverage of a lot of different things that they do. And in particular, this type of data can mitigate, for example, survey limitations, such as recall bias or social desirability bias, which can be particularly important in political science research. Think, for example, when you're trying to ask people, you're trying to understand what type of political content they're exposed to, if you're trying to understand the effect of political advertising and so on. You know, if you ask them, it's very likely that you're going to get data with measurement errors, or you know, these kind of survey responses are not super trustworthy. Also, for example, if you ask people questions about political attitudes, it's very likely that you're going to face some experimental demand effects and so on. So, you know, getting access to this data can get rid of some of these problems, but it also brings some challenges. You know, it's notoriously difficult to get data on smartphone content. Even, for example, if you have studies that have proprietary data, such as, you know, the Facebook 2020 election studies, they still require external tools to measure effects cross-platform. So even if you have data from Meta, for example, you still want to understand what happens to other platforms, and you need sort of tools that allow you to measure these cross-platform effects. This is particularly important because we know that people multi-home and use many different applications and not just one. And the problem is that once you ask people to install these kind of apps to measure what they do on their phones, typically their functionality is quite limited. So a lot of these applications are limited to measure, for example, just the times that people spend on their phones, but the content that they actually see on their screen remains a black box. So that's what we're doing in the paper. We are going to provide new facts of exposure to and engagement with political content during this consequential 2024 election in the US. And to answer this question and to address this challenge that I just told you, we use high-frequency, privacy-preserving data from a commercial smartphone app that is going to track keyword occurrences across all applications that people have. So we're going to observe keywords in any single application that you use on your phone. This is going to cover, in our data, we're going to have over 2,500 keywords ranging different topics. We have over 3,800 individuals and over 8,700 apps. So we're going to use this data and combine descriptive analysis with a difference in different exercise and also a variance decomposition exercise. And a summary of what we find: number one, we find that there is limited exposure to political content during this consequential 2024 election. And this is important because, we want citizens to be informed, particularly in nearby or close to an election. And if there was a time period where you would expect to see people engage with politics, it's precisely during this election. And still we see that there is very, very little exposure and engagement with this type of content. So to give you a sense of the numbers, the median individual encountered 21 seconds of political content. This is based on the keywords that we track on an average day. And to benchmark a little bit more, this is roughly the equivalent of 1/2 of a New York Times article. This is what the median person was exposed to during this time period. And we see that the little exposure that does occur is centered on national politics and with a specific focus on Donald Trump. So he was pretty much at the spotlight of the election, and it's largely sourced from sort of social media and video apps, which are kind of like sources of information that are less authoritative than news applications, for example. People get a substantial share of their news from these sort of more unregulated sources.
Yep. When you say exposure to political content, this is based on words. It's not based on arguments. It's not based on who. Like if I talk about politics and I'm on TikTok and you're watching that would be political content.
If there is a keyword on the ones that we track, yes, that would count as political content.
Typing in your phone, is that a keyword, or what is a keyword?
A keyword is anything that appears on your screen. So if you type it and then you see the post that appears on, you're on Facebook and you post something and then it appears, or a message on WhatsApp. And then you see because we cannot, our best understanding is that the keyboard we cannot track, but once it appears on the screen, such as you send a message, for example, that is going to enter into our sample.
And HTML is included in the HTML on the website.
HTML of websites is going to be included as well. So anything that appears on the screen is going to be included. In terms of videos, for example, videos with words, where you see the word, they are going to appear. If it's just sounds, we're not going to count.
Or do you mean like a subtitle or a caption?
Subtitle, or sometimes, I don't know, on TikTok you see that they have a caption, for example, or so that those kind of things we're going to see, as well as, for example, the description of the video. If it contains text, we're going to see that kind of.
Examples? They talk about what is that exactly, like how long it takes to read those keywords?
The time this technology is going to record what people see on their screens every 3 seconds. So to convert from exposures to time, what we do is we assume that you have a keyword occurrence that's 3 seconds, and if you see it in the next 3 second batch, that counts as another exposure. So we just multiply exposures times 3 seconds, and that's the measure of time. Yes.
You like video apps on
YouTube, but also TikTok, for example.
TikTok is a video app.
TikTok is a video app. Yeah. It's a video app. I think that's a good question. Yeah. Okay. So the second finding is that exposure remains consistently low during this period around the election. But there's going to be 2 spikes. There's going to be the debate, the presidential debate, and election day. The debate is going to coincide with Taylor Swift's endorsement to Kamala Harris, which we're going to also find that helped increase political exposures, particularly for Kamala Harris. Celebrity endorsements are commonplace in the US, particularly during this election, and we're going to find that they play some role in exposing people to politics. And the third finding is that there is substantial individual heterogeneity and app heterogeneity, as you might expect. We're going to find that individual heterogeneity is going to play a larger role than app heterogeneity in determining a variation in terms of exposure to political content on social and communication apps. Notably, social apps are where you have personalized algorithms, and communication apps are where you don't have algorithms. So that's where we're going to see a big role for individual behaviors. And the reverse is going to be true for news. In the case of news, we're going to see a more substantial role of apps rather than individuals in determining exposure. Okay, let me go quickly over the literature. So, yes.
Why did you go into asking this question? Like, what does it mean? This thing about the coordinating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So there are essentially, there are concerns, there are many different concerns about what drives what people see in their screens. We're going to see that essentially there's two camps, right? There's the camp that says that there are persistent biases that apps have. For example, there were concerns during this election that Elon Musk was pushing content favoring Donald Trump, also himself, promoting himself. So there's the kind of like the supply side type of argument that argues that this determines quite a lot the content that people see. On the other hand, there are concerns, for example, about filter bubbles, that people are only exposed to things that they want, and they drive pretty much the content that they see. So there's kind of like these two camps, and we're trying to understand a bit what is the source of heterogeneity.
But
Yeah.
do you have anything on actual? Are these the keywords systematically, like whenever people have some exposure, are they systematically more like right-wing, democratic leaning within a person?
But you're asking if we know the political orientation of the person, or
We know all the keywords.
we
I mean,
so we can split by whether you see Harris versus Trump versus we can do all that keyword level analysis. From what we have seen, it's very hard to determine whether an exposure is pro right wing versus pro left wing, because we see a lot of exposures of Kamala Harris on Truth Social, for example. So, and there's this app is also going to have sentiment, so you can track the sentiment of the surrounding keywords. But the sentiment seems to be pretty much Gaussian noise. So we've done a little bit of analysis, and it's not super trustworthy, the sentiment measure. It's probably based on the fact that it's based on this valence type of, it's not very, very sophisticated. So that's why, it's not very informative. So we can to some extent, but it's only based on occurrences, not on the meaning of words. Trying to see if we can exploit a little bit more the co-occurrence of the surrounding keywords to understand a bit more of the context, but yeah.
Or even ask like, do they make this for you? Do they extract it for you? Or do they just use it like this? Is there an opportunity to extract like periods of?
So we cannot go back, because as I'm going to explain, part of the privacy preserving thing is that you have to pre-specify the words that you track. We can all go back on time, but we can always potentially add more keywords later on. So that's something we're planning to do, take this analysis and just go further and enrich the set of keywords.
I think maybe you're going to get into more detail about I think like there's a confusion about, so what does, as a user, why does this app do for me?
Yes.
Versus as a researcher, what do you get?
Absolutely. I'll talk about this in a second in the background. Yes.
Maybe you understand too, but you're like saying that you're making descriptive inference to a population about how much time people are using. So is this supposedly targeting like the adult US population, and you have some kind of like adjusted representative sample of population of these 3,900 people? I'm like, how do I believe that?
I'll talk about the representativeness, because that's pretty much a big elephant in the room, and we'll talk about representativeness. That's a good question. Okay, let me go very, very quickly on the literature to go straight away to the background to answer these questions. So, there's literature on news consumption and selective exposure. Typically, this literature focus on a few sources that, part of the media diet of people. They don't really capture, the whole variety of apps that people or sources that people see. We're going to provide evidence on the how much and where of exposure across apps. So that's going to be let's say, the main contribution of the paper. There's literature on, for example, the role of campaigns and in particular the debates and endorsements in elections. Here we're going to use high frequency data and this kind of like natural experiment with Taylor Swift that was mere coincidence that we were tracking that keyword as a let's say as a case study of celebrity endorsement. There's also this literature on a little bit answering your question. This literature on what determines the exposure either to cross-cutting content or to political slant, and we have these different camps. As I was saying, one is that these exposures are driven by algorithms or by journalists, for example, in the case of media slant, but also there's papers that argue that it's individual decisions that play a bigger role. Again, typically this literature focuses on a single media source, and a lot of the variance could come from differences between the source types, and that's what we're trying to capture here. Let me go to the background to answer some of these questions. The primary data source that we use is called ScreenLake. This is a commercial smartphone brand tracking tool, so it's mostly used, for example, to understand whether Coca-Cola, where does it appear, in which apps people are getting exposed to this type of brands. The way that it works is it embeds software, this software developing kits in popular Android smartphone apps. And this software is going to passively detect keywords every 3 seconds across all the apps. It's going to capture the keyword occurrences, also the context of surrounding keywords. And as I was telling you, the sentiment score of these random keywords. And importantly, it's going to implement some privacy protections because this is potentially quite sensitive. So it's going to, number one, implement explicit user consent. Users are going to be asked explicitly if they want to add this extra functionality. And this is to answer your question. As a result, they're going to be incentivized with premium features. So you're going to have an app, and you're going to have some extra features if you agree to share the data with this company. Some of the let's say privacy protections is that there is no personal data that is collected. So this is fully anonymous tracking of pre-specified terms, which has the advantage that there's no sensitive data being collected, but the disadvantage that you need to think ahead of what you're collecting. Again, to preserve privacy, all data is going to be processed on the device before uploading. So we only receive counts, essentially counts of keywords, and also the amount of time that people spend on different apps, etc. And the keyword that we're using, so we're focusing on the period around the 2024 election. This is September to November. We keep collecting data, but the results that you're going to see today are from this period. And we are tracking primary political keywords. These are going to be 538 political keywords. These are of two types. One, election terms that we pre-specified. These are polls, ballot, campaign, debate, democracy, Republican, etc. And importantly, politicians as well. So we have a very rich set of politicians. We have the presidential and the vice presidential candidates and virtually all Congress members and governors. Besides this, we also track 19 major issues that were highly debated or highly discussed in the election, such as immigration, Gaza, and so on. And then we're going to have, importantly, control keywords that come from the business model of this app, which, this app is meant to track a lot of different brands. We're going to have entertainment, keywords, sports. So here I was trying to give some local example. There's the Football Club of Montreal that appears in our data, just to show you the extents. Celebrities, I was also trying to get a Canadian celebrity that appears in our data. So this is the kind of control words that we're detecting. Now, to answer the question about external validity, so this is one important concern. We have individuals, but the individuals that we have are those who opt to use these applications and those who opt to share their data with ScreenLake. One important feature of the anonymity that ScreenLake guarantees is that there's no information about users, and that has the disadvantage that we don't know any demographics, and there's no way of contacting them and sending them surveys and so on. But what we do have is that ScreenLake infers age and gender. We don't know if other characteristics as well, but at least the ones that they were willing to share with us. And they do this based on their internal algorithms, based on the keywords that people see and the apps that they use. They're going to infer these characteristics. And as you can see, this is a selected sample. So, in terms of the demographics, our sample skews more towards male and younger audiences. So, it is selective. Now, something interesting to see is that the group composition seems to remain stable over time. So we don't see, substantial differences across this time period. And also something that gives us some peace of mind is that Screenlate gave us some weights to be able to match the sample to the US census, at least based on these observable characteristics. And reweighting doesn't change, at least our main result, which is the only exercise that we've done so far, which is reweighting the finding that I told you of the limited exposure to political content. That doesn't change at all after we reweight, suggesting that it's not driven by the particular characteristics of this sample. We're planning to extend this analysis, of course, to the remaining results. Second, so this is in terms of just a little bit what we can say about the characteristics of the sample. Second, we're also interested in understanding, besides characteristics, what else could be a source of differences or peculiarities of the sample. So one thing that we do is to understand whether, for example, they have different apps installed than a regular user. So here what we do is we compare the app ranking, so how frequently they use different apps, and we compare that to the Google Store, and we see that this is highly correlated, suggesting that there's not a strange pattern in terms of at least the apps that they have installed. A little bit more on the intensive margin, we compare the amount of time that they spend overall on the phone and social media relative to industry benchmarks. And also we have recruited a sample on Prolific, small sample, where we ask them to upload screenshots of the apps and the time that they spend on their phone. And we see overall very similar patterns with some differences. For example, our sample tends to use Facebook slightly less than the representative Prolific user, based potentially on these age differences, but overall they spend similar amounts of time overall on the phone and on media. Yes.
What about Android versus iPhone? It's only Android, right?
It's only Android. And we're comparing, so this finding on that is only, again, comparing versus Android users. Something we plan is potentially, reweight our estimates based on, to match them a little bit to an Android sample, but it's specific to Android. You cannot do these kind of things in iPhone because, it's impossible. Okay, finding number one is this limited exposure to and engagement with political content. We see that the median individual encountered political words 9 to 12 times daily. Depending on whether, for example, you consider issues or you don't consider issues, it goes from 9 to 12, but it remains pretty small. As I was telling you, we benchmark it based on the amount of time that they spend, multiplying times 3 seconds. So that gives us 21 seconds spent consuming political content. This is 1/2 of the political words. So we, got a sample of New York Times articles with the 2024 elections tag, and this is more or less one half of what you would be exposed to if you read one of these articles. A little bit more analysis. For example, if we restrict the sample to engaged encounters, meaning that you spend more than 3 seconds encountering that keyword on your screen, potentially engaging with or reading that piece of information, the median goes to 0 pretty much. And
you have the word on your screen down. I mean, it showed up, Trump shows up, and then you keep reading about Trump. You don't see Trump on your screen, but you've been spending time in the article.
Yeah, so something that we can do is to try to see if the window between Trump, for example, if we see Trump, in a given second, to expand a little bit, what do we mean by what is an engaged encounter? So maybe you encounter at the beginning of the article the word Trump.
Yeah, and then another keyword.
And then another keyword, and then Trump again. So that's something we need to do to understand exactly how to measure and how to define that window to understand a little bit more engagement. So that's definitely something that we have in the to-do list to expand.
Do you know how much time they spend on the social media or on their phones?
Yes.
seconds.
So 21 seconds, our sample is pretty much similar, yeah, comparable to the average. So it's, you spend 4.5 hours, it's quite small. Yes. Okay, so yeah, still something to do in terms of to understand what is an engaged encounter, but if you define it as exposures that last more than 3 seconds, the median goes to 0. And also if you focus only on communication apps, if you focus only on communication apps, you see that again the median goes to 0.
And the mean, just for some moment, always.
The mean remains pretty small. I didn't add it here on the background under reserve slides, but again the median remains the mean remains pretty small as well. It's a little bit skewed because you're gonna see that we have some people that have quite a lot of exposures, but it remains pretty small overall. Yes.
If you're on YouTube and you're watching a video and the text disappears, or the video keeps on playing and you're still talking about politics, is that happening?
No.
So you're saying you're changing the video changes. Yeah. So in that case, we would not be counting that. So it would disappear from our data. But if you don't go on full screen and you keep seeing the description, then the keyword keeps repeating. So that's one of the things why the mean is a little bit skewed, but still it's few exposures, and we have a lot of those on YouTube.
I think what we do is to get a random sample of things and like run the exact same process. Look at what you're getting.
Yeah.
And look at how you have to scale that up. So if you were to do something on YouTube and having single touch, this implies that you watch 30 seconds of the video format.
Absolutely.
In a way, I feel like you're getting a little pushback of just several around the country. You can scale up all these apps. So basically, you can literally repeat the whole process for every single thing.
Yeah.
You know the date, you know the keywords, just try to look at the article.
Totally.
We're looking.
That's something that we're planning to do.
And then you can recreate all the interaction.
The celebrities give you a reference.
Exactly, and that's another benchmark that I'm going to give you in the next slide. But this is something that we are planning to do, and in particular, we're planning to install, this app ourselves, and to have some reference to understand these kind of cases a little bit more in detail. What happens if I watch this video and so on, to have to give people a little bit of a benchmark of what this means. But absolutely. You have podcasts too, so that you would be listening to Joe Rogan, for example, and that wouldn't be counted in our.
Yeah, I think the point is that it's probably severely biased downward, and it's really hard to say how it's severely biased downward. So I think
Yeah.
I mean, it seems unbelievable. Face value, though maybe it's true, but if you're going to really hang your hat on that, then you really got to show us that that's not biased downward in any
benchmarks.
way.
Absolutely, yeah. No, this is a big concern, and that's absolutely true. What we can say is these kind of relative occurrences. For example, this is what you were asking before. So this is another benchmark. The median individual still encounters politics less than celebrities and entertainment keywords, but more than sports. So this is kind of your reference level. If you don't believe anything else of the the levels, for example, because of these issues, still politics is way below entertainment and
from TV as well, right? People like it's like political consumption is a speed or something else.
Absolutely, no. I mean,
So how is it consistent with that?
It's consistent with those findings. We confirm it once you kind of see the whole universe of things that people say.
We have to benchmark it relative to
other media sources.
Typical, survey data of how much you spend watching different types of or news channels or entertainment stuff, and just try to benchmark it relative.
Yeah, to other news sources. How exactly? That's a good idea.
I remember also you're sitting into journal, but there's a large political science literature now about how people receive their political news through entertainment, so how and the mechanisms by which U.S. consumers receive their news through shows in ways that would defy your definition of keywords. What's her name? Anyhow, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, no, that's very useful.
I understand, like, you might get some pushback that your reference category is not a real.
I see. No, that's useful to see this literature that I'm not super familiar with. Yes.
What?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think you raised your hand first. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm just wondering, the other explanation for sports being that low, people are following sports because the capturing information, and sports is always images and there's never words. Like you capture like the name of the sport team, or like well, there's a lot of talk about betting as well.
Yeah, I mean, could be potentially driven by, you're exposed to the Lakers logo and not necessarily reading about the Lakers. You're exposed to summaries or videos of in a way that is not captured. So that could be one potential explanation. But this is something something nice to add to our benchmark estimates. You were first.
A bunch of people feel like in sports. They make them picture in a way that it's very tricky to media.
Yeah, that's another good point. I think you were.
How much is the hours people spend on that? How much is spent like reading versus watching videos? But that sort of get to it, right? Because it's
I see.
maybe it's just a little.
No, that's a good point. Potentially that would be another back of the envelope way that we could do, just reweight. For example, suppose that people we're undercounting the amount of exposures on podcasts or on videos. How would that look like in our data? I think that's a good idea. Yes, Nick.
So is that list exhaustive or there are other categories?
This is exhaustive. So we classified, essentially they gave us a bunch of keywords and then we asked ChatGPT to classify them into these categories. These are the control categories that we have. We have some other keywords that we didn't know where to place in this category. So we could potentially expand a little bit because we have the set of control keywords that we have in the end ended up being 831, and we have, I think, 1,700 in total, but some things that we couldn't place and we didn't understand really well what they mean, so we could expand potentially.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to say, if you take that figure with the, and I say, okay, the average time of exposure to iPhone or to graphics is 2 hours, then that proportion is politics.
How does it map to the time? I see. That would be a good figure to make. We don't have it right now, but that would be something good to benchmark. Yes.
Can you draw this figure but within an app? So you would kind of neutralize the type of media to which they're exposed to that might help with minimizing the differences that your measurement instrument has.
We can totally do it. Absolutely.
It's all the Instagram rule, you see if you're picking up keywords.
We can totally do it, and I'm going to show you some results about the political exposure within app and within app types. But yeah, move a little bit. Yes.
Rafael, finish and we will do our questions for
I lost totally track of the time. Thanks for the.
Yeah. In 5 or 6 minutes, and then we can
Okay.
use some questions.
Thanks for the nudge. All right, I'm going to go very fast now to show you everything that I have. Another dimension is there's very little exposure to Congress members. So we have, 10 mentions of presidential candidates for every mention of a Congress member. The gap goes higher if we focus on their likely local Congress member. And within national politics, we have a heavy focus on Trump. So Donald Trump substantially outweighs Kamala Harris in terms of exposure. Now, there were a lot of noteworthy events during this period. Second attempt to assassinate Trump, a lot of different events, Joe Rogan endorsement, and so on. In spite of that, we see pretty persistently flat encounter of these keywords, except on kind of like two notable episodes. One is the presidential debate, and the other one is election day. In terms of the debate, it also coincided with the endorsement of Taylor Swift, which occurred minutes after the debate ended. You see that mentions of Taylor Swift, for example, increased substantially right after the debate, somewhat persistently overall. And here a question we had is, did Taylor Swift's endorsement increase political engagement? There's a lot of focus right now on celebrity endorsements and their role in politics. And this is in line, for example, with anecdotal evidence of how the registrations on this government website increased substantially after the debate using her link. What we can do here is we build a prior measure of exposure, which is, we have Swifties, who are those who were exposed to Taylor Swift on music and video apps before the debate. And we can compare them to non-Swifties, right? At the moment of debate, and we can see that the endorsement really increased the exposure relatively more for Swifties than non-Swifties. These are the raw means. I can show you again the diff in diff estimates. For example, this is the previous graph was in terms of raw exposures to political content. This is the share of Harris content, and we see that increased as well substantially. So. Suggesting that endorsement played a role in exposing people to politics, and in particular to exposing relatively more to Harris. Election day, we have some evidence that we saw a spike during election day. It seems that most of it is people just trying to find out the result. There's not a lot of evidence of people trying to find out information right before deciding, in line, for example, with concerns that people were searching for. Did Joe Biden drop out on the same day of election day? Lastly, in terms of individuals and apps heterogeneity, we see some evidence of heterogeneity across apps in terms, for example, of where people source their political content. Only 3% of these exposures come from news apps. A big majority come from kind of like these less authoritative sources such as communication, social media, and so on, with some caveats that you can still get exposures through social media, for example, to the New York Times, and also that exposures on browsers are counted in the other category. But just to say that there is some substantial heterogeneity in apps. Another way to see it is if you focus on the share of political exposures relative to other categories. This is what we were discussing a bit earlier. You see, there's some apps. If you focus on social media apps, there's some apps such as Truth Social, which there's most of the exposures are political. They're very comparable to other news outlets. X, for example, is also quite political, comparable, for example, to the New York Times in terms of political exposures. And then at the other end, you have YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, again, potentially because of the issue with the videos. Also, this is consistent and constant across all of these different categories. But you see these social media apps where there's not a lot of exposure to political content. I think that there's some heterogeneity there. A lot of heterogeneity as well in terms of the individuals. You have some individuals where they focus a lot of the political exposures, some individuals that are very, very little exposed to politics. So here's the question. I don't know if I still have time in the last 2 minutes. The question is, what drives exposure? You can consider kind of like two opposite worlds. One where individual heterogeneity plays a bigger role. Consider, for example, individuals sorting into apps and choosing what they want to see, and apps fully personalizing content, or being completely undifferentiated, one of the two cases. In the other extreme, you have app heterogeneity playing a bigger role in determining exposure or variance to exposure to political content. In this case, you can still have individuals sorting into apps, but having little agency otherwise in the content that they see. And in this case, in this world, you have differentiating apps sort of competing with, offering different exposures to people. And so the question is, which of these worlds do we live in? To answer that question, we conduct this variance decomposition exercise that is sort of a benchmark in labor economics. which essentially is just decomposing the variance that comes from individual fixed effects, app fixed effects, and the covariance between individual fixed effects and app fixed effects. Sort of as a sanity check, we were interested in these particular keywords, which were highly debated, focusing on social media apps. Noteworthy to see, for example, that there is high exposure to Trump, not surprisingly, on Truth Social and also on X. Trump is, for example, overrepresented relative to Harris on X and some other apps. And quite interestingly, Elon Musk is overrepresented on X and not on any other social media platform. And this does not happen with other kind of like reference CEOs, comparable CEOs, let's say. Yes, in line a little bit with those concerns that there was a little bit of preferencing in this application. The final results in terms of variance, the composition, we have 4 results. Number 1, when you focus on all apps, app heterogeneity seems to be more important than individual heterogeneity, so explaining up to double the variance. The pattern is reversed once you focus on social applications and communication applications, where either you have full personalization or no algorithm at all. And you again see a little bit of app heterogeneity playing a larger role in the case of news. We lie a little bit in between these worlds. In this case, app heterogeneity explains a little bit more variance than individual heterogeneity. And finally, this is, I promise, the final result. We find that sorting is unimportant in general, except for the case of news. And here, this is a little bit against our priors. We're expecting to see sort of a positive authoritative matching. But we see the opposite. We see a negative authoritative matching where this pattern is consistent with individuals counterbalancing their low baseline exposure. So think, for example, of a person that is not very exposed to politics, but still goes on Twitter. This kind of pattern would explain this. I'll conclude here. Thank you very much.
How long they spend on each job, even if you're not seeing words.
Yes.
Right. So in a way, so if you think you have a random sample of words, usually like the frequency of the words when you add them up should basically be proportional to the time you spend on apps. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that is to get you an idea. Obviously, you cannot do this kind of with. So in a way, like maybe a certain apps have more entertainment, other news and so on. But at least like it has to be if you hit that proportionally and you scale up the words you're hitting by the time they spend on the app. That's a much better way of doing it. Like that's an easy, without any effort. That's a very easy way to rescale.
Interesting.
The things you have, right? So
yeah.
That's sort of like one thing. And the other thing that I was thinking, like maybe I'm very weird, but actually I don't have any apps. And so on days because I think the apps is what makes it very addictive. In a way, actually, I force myself to browse every single thing I want to watch. That's basically like sophisticated, time consistent, person. Basically, and I wonder, like right now, like that's for you, that's other.
That's other.
So I'm just wondering, like, and see that was very important. I don't know. And sort of, so what can you? Don't you know from Indiana what's going on? So in a way, it's closer to 50% of everything, no?
Yeah, but we don't. We just see that you saw the word Trump on Chrome.
You have like Fox in there. You have CNN in the keywords.
We do have those keywords, so we can see if you consume through, for example, through the news. And in fact, in the paper, we do a little bit of that exercise, so trying to do some back of the envelope calculation, and this goes from 3 to 5%. Yeah.
We're continuing using the browser rather than the app.
Exactly. So it still remains pretty small. Yeah. Yes, Nico.
Well, what about people using computers?
Computers, we don't. So that's when I was talking about the limitations, there's a lot of studies, for example, focusing on browser extensions. There you have kind of like the reverse problem that people spend a lot of time on their phones. So we don't have anything about browsers. Yes.
You have app usernames to you for like functions, news outlets, or something as keywords. Like,
sorry, what do you mean?
the username The Twitter.
The handle of like at real Donald Trump.
Yeah, stuff like that.
We don't.
Exactly. For Instagram, for example, again, the username of the New York Times, you could see when they're saying posts from the New York Times instead of from anything else.
I see.
Or if they're seeing a post from a specific politician.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. So I know that the algorithm, the way that it works is, we track Donald Trump, but it also considers, for example, people just talking about Donald or people talking about Trump or Kamala Harris, both the same. I don't know if, for example, at real Donald Trump, if it would count as an exposure. So that would be something interesting.
I'm also worried about this when someone tweets instead of using the person's full name, they just use the handle. Like Trump, I mean, people will be like, oh, real Donald Trump did this.
Yeah.
Donald Trump did this.
No, that's something that we need to check. How does that count? Totally.
I was also wondering about, do you capture when people open their home screen and there's like notifications on news or?
Yes, we have notifications as well. Interesting.
Play podcast when you open your home screen, the title will show up. If it's a news title, you can like if they're opening their home screen and there's Spotify showing a news title about them listening to a news podcast, and you could sometimes measure if they're being exposed to news while they're phones are off.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very useful. Thanks.
Any more questions or comments? We have 3 minutes. Okay, so one last question. So I guess, I don't know, I still don't understand why. So I get, as a researcher, what you get from this Screen Lake app, but
Yeah.
for me as a user, why would I want to use this app?
Yeah, you get the best of our understanding is that you get premium features. Premium features. So for example, suppose I'll give you this example, just come up with it. You have an app that tracks how much time you spend on social or the phone, and a premium feature is getting some better analysis or something. If you want that premium feature, you have to give your data.
Oh, okay.
Probably all games where they get like, money to buy new clothes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so premium features and on the apps that Screen Lake uses. So Screen Lake is the company, and the company has apps that people install. And these apps, if you're a user, these apps give you some premium functionalities with the advantage that you get those functionalities, and we get the data.
I pay for the data.
Yes. That's the advantage that Screen Lake is. Yeah.
I was thinking maybe you could do something like, so like, it would be interesting to use like the term frequency, like inverse document frequency, not documents per se, but you could do some kind of inverse app frequency or inverse something else just to get like if you're looking for more like descriptive leverage on what like, instead of just doing the frequency you did the variation decomposition, but like another way of maybe like easier way to interpret the other way would just be to use some kind of inverse document term frequency.
Oh, that's useful. Yeah, that's a way of normalizing. Yeah, there's a lot of text analysis things that we want to do, such as word embeddings, for example, exploiting that we have for instance.
It seems like you're not leveraging full. You just have a keyword, but another thing you could do to try to like expand that would be then to take those keywords and use like word embedding techniques to figure out what all the other keywords close to that keyword are to see, could that measure how much in the cosine space to figure out how much you're actually missing with the keywords that you have. So you can take some kind of huge corpus of text, use the keyword you have, find the cosine similarity of all those words with all the other words, using word, some kind of embedding technique, and then when you're redoing it, estimate how much you might have missed, and hopefully show that you didn't look very much. with the restricted sample, because I guess people are gonna worry that you have the wrong
Hmm,
keywords. That's gonna be another critique.
I see.
Going forward, like what do you pay for? You pay for
We paid for a set of words, and right now, kind of like our deal was a set of words, and
you can expand otherwise.
we can expand, and that's something we're potentially, yeah,
How
potentially
would
considering.
you like the like Texas data people are gonna want you to do that for them.
Yeah. No, that's useful.
Or by formally, I mean, like,
Yeah. Embedding, so yeah. Cosine differences. Okay, well, thank you very much.